Welcome to Daily Dose of Knowledge, and what you are about to hear will make you question everything you think you know about yourself. In 1961, a psychologist named Stanley Milgram ran an experiment that terrified the scientific community. Not because of what it revealed about monsters, because of what it revealed about ordinary people. Milgram wanted to understand how Nazi soldiers followed orders to exterminate millions of human beings. He suspected the answer was not that they were uniquely evil. He suspected it was something far more disturbing. The experiment began with a simple advertisement. Volunteers were needed for a study on memory and learning. Ordinary people responded: teachers, engineers, postal workers, salesmen. They arrived at Yale University and were told they would play the role of teacher. Another participant, called the learner, would be strapped to a chair in a separate room. The teacher would ask questions through a microphone. Every wrong answer would be punished with an electric shock. The shocks started at 15 volts, and with every wrong answer they increased by 15 volts more, up to 450 volts. The shock machine had labels on it: slight shock, moderate shock, strong shock, very strong shock, intense shock, extreme intensity shock, and at the top, simply the words 30. What the teacher did not know was that the learner was an actor. There were no real shocks, but the screams were real recordings. At 75 volts, the learner grunted in pain. At 150 volts, he demanded to be released. At 180 volts, he screamed he could no longer stand the pain. At 300 volts, he went completely silent. Silence from a man who had been screaming. Many teachers became distressed. They turned to the experimenter, a man in a white lab coat, and asked to stop. The experimenter responded with 4 scripted phrases. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice but to continue. Nothing more, no threats, no punishment for stopping. Just calm, authoritative instruction. Milgram expected that almost no one would continue past 150 volts. He surveyed psychiatrists before running the experiment. They predicted fewer than 1% would go to the maximum. 65% of participants administered the full 450 volts, not 1%, 65%. 2 out of every 3 ordinary people, teachers, engineers, postal workers, delivered what they believed was a potentially lethal electric shock to a screaming stranger, because a man in a white coat told them to continue. The experiment was replicated across cultures, across decades, across genders. The result was always the same: ordinary people, extraordinary compliance. Now let us talk about why. The first mechanism is the agentic state. Milgram proposed that human beings have 2 modes of operating: the autonomous state, where a person acts according to their own conscience, and the agentic state, where a person sees themselves as an instrument of another's will. In the agentic state, moral responsibility shifts. The person no longer feels accountable for their actions. They are simply following instructions. They are just doing their job. The agentic state is not unique to laboratories. It is the psychological condition of every soldier who follows an illegal order, every bureaucrat who processes a harmful policy without question, every employee who executes a decision they know is wrong because someone above them made it. The second mechanism is the authority gradient. The experimenter wore a white coat. He stood in a prestigious institution. He spoke with calm, professional certainty. The brain, trained by decades of social learning, reads these signals as legitimate authority. And legitimate authority, the brain has learned, should be obeyed. This is not stupidity. It is a social adaptation that works most of the time. We cannot evaluate every instruction from scratch. We use authority as a shortcut. The problem is that the shortcut can be exploited. The third mechanism is incremental commitment. The shocks did not start at 450 volts. They started at 15. Each step was only slightly larger than the last. By the time a participant reached dangerous levels, they had already committed to the logic of the experiment dozens of times. Stopping now would mean admitting that everything they had already done was wrong. The escalation itself became the trap. This is the mechanism behind every atrocity that built gradually, every genocide that began with paperwork, every abuse that started with something small. The fourth mechanism is physical distance from the harm. When the learner was in the same room as the teacher, compliance dropped significantly. When the teacher had to physically hold the learner's hand to the shock plate, it dropped further. The further the harm from the eyes, the easier it became to continue. This is why modern systems of harm are always mediated by distance. The drone operator miles from the target, the executive who never sees the factory floor, the algorithm that makes the decision so no human has to grow. Now, let us talk about what this means for you. You are not in that laboratory, but you live inside systems that use every one of these mechanisms every single day. Authority figures in white coats or expensive suits or verified accounts tell you what to think. Incremental steps ask for small compliance before large compliance. Distance removes you from the consequences of your participation. And the agentic state whispers, this is not your responsibility, you are just following the process. You are just doing your job. Milgram's finding was not that people are evil. It was that people are situational. Given the right conditions, the right authority, the right incremental steps, and the right distance from harm. Most people will do things their conscience would never permit if asked directly. The defense against this is not courage alone. It is awareness. The person who recognizes the agentic state when it arrives can choose to exit it. The person who sees the incremental escalation can name it before the next step. The person who understands the authority gradient can ask, does this person's title actually make this right? Milgram gave us the most uncomfortable gift in the history of psychology, a mirror. And what it showed was not a monster. It showed someone who looks exactly like you. Subscribe to Daily Dose of Knowledge and drop a comment with what you would do in that room.